I don't know if you can feel this. I certainly can feel this, and I think the staff also can feel this, but the quality and the nature of the discussions that have happened here this time around, it is substantially different from the extremely good and collaborative and fruitful discussions that we had in Hong Kong in 2018. And you saw what came out of that. We scanned on those outcomes yesterday, and that was a considerable undertaking. But you've built upon that. We are so proud of what you are doing together. You have really moved this. You are doing this together, and you will need to draw upon each other for strength, for that commitment, for that agency in the work ahead. So with that, we're going to go ahead and open up our last segment of the summit, what we call the fishbowl conversation for obvious reasons. You've all been detailing out the solutions for the topics that you've identified yesterday. In this session, we're going to invite you and your peers to share the key outcomes and way forward as part of our fishbowl conversation. So we're going to have 2 rounds, with the second round focusing in on more on the decarbonization, and the first round looking at all the other issues that you have defined as needing our action, our leadership, and our commitment over the next year. So with that, could I please invite the representatives of the round 1 topics to please join me in the circle. All right, great. Hello. Hello. Good. We have your names up on the screens now. So this is not meant to be a presentation. It's meant to be sort of a sharing session. We're interested in the outcomes of your conversations, but also anything that's interesting to you about how you got to those outcomes, including potential barriers that you as a team and as a group are going to need to address in the year ahead as well. So perhaps let's go ahead and start with you, Caroline, on the forward-looking seafaring. And I have a microphone for you.
I sit down.
You can stand up. You can move around.
Okay, I think I'm better standing up. All right, so our chart is over there, forward-looking seafaring. Perhaps I'll just set the framework of our discussions. We have a very small group, about 8 people, but very passionate and really, really very detailed discussions. And so there are certain issues we can't really look into. For example, we have concentrated only on seafarers. So we have not really looked into the onshore development of the staff on land. So, so at the end of the day, on a company level, we want to have competent and qualified seafarers. So how do we have that? So we identified a few issues. The most important is attraction of the young. Yeah, how do we create awareness to the young and the very young? So we came up with some concrete actions, engagement with schools, learning journeys to the op centers, bring the kids to where the working areas are. How do we tell them from young that, give them the awareness that a seafarer and a pilot on the airplane is the same position? How do we create that excitement and that aspiration? So we then talk about, we need to look from the perspectives of the young. We are always looking from the perspectives of the companies. So now we should actually take a step backwards, look at the aspirations of the young, and see what are they talking about, and let's try and connect the gaps. So that's what we're thinking of attraction. And social media is very big now for the young, so that's an area that we should work on. Then we talk about the next level, which is the education, training, and development. So again, we start with the schools, and then we need to make sure that they have they make sure that they're given the training, but also the clear career path. And how do we go about doing that in a very concrete action? And we need to sit down with them because the young need to have visibility in how their career is going to pan out from sea and then transition to land, where they know that they can come back to land and they can end up in a different career, but with the experience from the sea. So we talk about having monitoring and tracking their progress. We also talk about having a periodical review, one-on-one. But all these take resources, and all these takes money. So cost is an issue for many companies. Of course, with the big companies, that's not an issue. But with many small companies, I think cost is an issue. So we also talk about, we didn't really do diversity and inclusion because we think that one of them is diversity and inclusion. So we leave that alone. And we talk about new training methods for new fields, new ships. How do we upskill? How do we reskill them? So when we talk about attraction of the young, I miss a point is how do we bring the benefits and articulate those benefits to the individuals and also to the families concerned. So once we have all the education, training, development, the most important is the welfare, the last part. How do we build a support infrastructure for onboard staff? How do we share and communicate their concerns? How do we get them to communicate and share their concerns with us? And how do we then close out those concerns? So there are many helplines available. How do we then create the awareness that there are various helplines available and you can actually let them know what are the agendas of the helplines, in which areas do you need the helplines, you go to which helpline. So it's just creating the awareness. So we also talk about, do we need a global strategic review, a global fund to talk about, to actually promote the welfare of the seafarers? But that's a question mark. Can we have a global fund? Yeah, so at the end of the day, when you bring everything back, we want competent, qualified, fulfilled, happy seafarers on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions before we move on to the next presentation. Looking to attract the next generation of leadership, I was struck by saying we have to stop thinking about what we need as a company and start thinking about what do the next generation want in terms of their own career development and fulfillment, right? And it makes sense to start with the schools and to articulate the benefits of a seafaring career path and have a clear career path. But I'll be curious when we get to sort of the digital aspects of the change that we're looking to embark upon, and how do you attract the digital skills that we're going to need, making this industry not just seem like it's forward-leaning, but really being the forward-leaning industry that we're building. And I wonder if that came up, as well as the question around diversity. It's a hard one. It's a hard one, and it's a structural one. But as we look around the room, how do we create that diversity from a structural standpoint? Were there any sort of conversations around that?
In short, no, we don't have time for that. We did talk about diversity and inclusion. In diversity and inclusion, we not only talk about gender, but we also talk about race, we talk about nationalities, and how do we upskill the seafarers, that the pool that we have, and not look for the new pool. Yeah, digitalization is very much upon us. If we can use digitalization to let the seafarers do their job as seafarers and not too much administrative work. I think that's something we should work for.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Caroline. Thank you so much. I next will love to turn it over to Graham Henderson for Together and Safety. Here you are, Graham. And as sort of a bridge, if we are able to make a safer industry, it makes it more attractive for our young people to join and more secure for them to join too. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm standing here surrounded by a sea of decarbonisation, and I want to bring us back to reality in terms of the fact that we've got our seafarers out there. And I look at the names of the people here, and I look at some amazing titles, President, Chief Executive Officer, Chairman, etc. You're all big people in this room, big, big people. But as they say, you judge a big person by how they treat a small person. And most, if not all, of these accidents that were happening, all of those fatalities that I talked about, they're small people. You will be judged by how you treat them and how you react in terms of the work you take forward on safety. I'd like to make sure that we leave the room with that in mind. As you know, we have been on to Together in Safety for a year. We're quite a long way ahead. So we were concentrating very, very strongly around how do we reach that small person? How do we reach the worker who was like the person I described about my friend in Nigeria? So we looked at it in 3 areas, and I was talking to a friend of mine here, and he described it so well. He described it as top down, bottom up, and keeping the score. So here we go, top down at the boardroom level. We are going to be very, very committed around making sure that this is the top priority in those boardrooms. Making sure that all of the effort that goes in not just is a discussion at the boardroom, but actually reaching that low level of the worker. This involves things like visiting ships, making sure that we look after those people, as I described yesterday, in terms of if you look after them, they will perform well for you. So we're going to work through the industry bodies, through the P&I clubs. And the other area I'm interested in very strongly is fishing. And you might say that's nothing to do with us. Well, it is something to do with us because we hit a lot of fishing boats every year. And if you're talking about small people, they are very small people. Often 7 or 8 children, the only money earner, and not earning a lot of money. And we, I think, have an accountability for that group. So we're going to be working through into that group too. In terms of bottom up, the biggest area here is around seafarer well-being, around human factors. We're really just getting into this, but there's some excellent work that has been done. And you've got to ask, why do people do what they do? Why does a trained person with all the procedures, done the toolbox talks, done everything, why does that person go and have an accident? How can it be? Often it's because they're stressed, overworked. Maybe they didn't listen to the training because they had their mind on other things, or they've had bad news from home. This is what we mean by human factors, and how can we address that to give the seafarer, that small person that I talk about, a voice in the boardroom. So we'll be working on that. And thirdly, very importantly, around data reporting. We do not have the data reporting that other industries have. Now, the numbers I gave you yesterday are numbers that my group, my team, has generated from the shipping media. There have been some studies, I referred to some UK ones yesterday, but that data is not prevalent. Yet, if we have that data, if we have a common database, if we have common reporting, knowledge sharing, then we can really start to understand what is behind some of these incidents and get some transparency. And very much around this is getting some of that data, getting some of that information out, and get some of that storytelling out as well. So those were the 3 key areas. The way I look at this is our industry, it's our people, and it's our responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graham. And on that latter point with the data reporting, I'm looking forward to seeing what kinds of connections or overlap that we'll have with the pooling data for common benefit, as well as standards for data and exchange. But before then, let's go to Gary Vogel on the rebranding conversation.
Thank you. So we had a really dynamic discussion, and why rebranding? To attract, diversity and talent. We are going to fill the chairs that we need and the spaces we need, but it's about filling it with the people who are going to lead this industry forward, not just with people. And the first thing we all agreed is that we have a great story to tell. And people in this industry, most of us, we're passionate about it, but we don't get that story out there. Over 90% of goods travel by sea, only 3% of CO2, and as everyone in this room knows, we're going to zero. And we got to get that story out there. We move the world, and we do it responsibly. And if you ask most people outside this industry, that's not the message that they would say they've heard. So we're very efficient. I'm just going to step over here so I don't miss any of the points that we talked about. So we really took two tracks in terms of our mechanical CAD, if you will. First of all is, in this room, there are so many ambassadors, right? And if each of us got out there and talked to students in the university or even high schools and things, and people within our companies, so putting together a roadmap, if you will, of what to say, how to get it out there, because we all have our niches within this business, but getting out a common story about it would really be a great way to start. And so, working on that of how we get out there. Some countries, shipping has a very high profile. In the United States, we joke, people in shipping, they think you work for FedEx or UPS. So we got to get out there and tell the story, and we think it's a great story. The other thing is, of course, today it's social media, right? Most of us are at an age, we're not digital natives, as they say, but that's where the message gets across. So what we thought was, under GMF, maybe come up with a short video. We started with 10 minutes, then it went to 5, and someone said, I think you got to get it across in 30 seconds. So how long it'll be, we're not quite sure, but we put together a storyboard. And this is kind of what we thought of how to get that message out there in order to attract people to at least want to take a look at shipping. If we could just have people where they want to just open the book and say, what is it there? So we started out with the idea that we have a rich past, we're here in the present, but most importantly, we have an amazing future, right? We talked about moving 90% of goods. We are the center of global trade. We're the pulse of the world, and we help develop economies around the world. And then moving on to the fact that this is global, and showing the trade routes that really cover the world and connect every country in the world, and the cultural exchange. One of the rich things about this industry is the ability to meet people from around the world, and that's something that most industries don't give you, the ability to work in different countries and things like that. And then the fact is, shipping is so many different areas: technology, fuel development, blockchain, AI, and sustainability. These are things that resonate with young people today, and the varied careers, starting with people working on a ship, port operations, going to finance, trading derivatives, weather, meteorology, hospitality, and cruise. There's so many different areas that are encompassed in shipping. And finally, ultimately ending up with, be part of moving the world responsibly. So obviously we need to develop it further, but that's what we came up with.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. I think what really struck me as you're talking about having a common story, right? Talking with a common language when we're rebranding our industry. Rebranding is not new, and we've been talking about this for many years now, but I think what is new is the actions that are speaking for themselves and causing everyone to look at this industry differently. Like, oh, you are moving the world. You always have, but you're now doing so in a way that's at the tip of the spear of the change that society expects from industry now. This sector, the one that has been criticized, is the one that is making the change happen. And other sectors are going to be learning from you. And as we do things like, you mentioned sort of digitization, right? All of the outcomes from last year's summit, people are noticing. And those actions that you all are part of, That's doing the rebranding. Maybe we could be talking in more common language, right? But the actions are driving the rebranding itself. And that's really quite something. Thank you so much for sharing. Michael, we're going to go with you next. Incentivizing collaboration in supply chains on sea, at sea and on land.
Thank you. It's great to be here. This is my first time at this conference, and I think yesterday we spent a fair amount of time talking about the need to rebrand. We beat ourselves up quite a bit, some of it deservedly, some of it perhaps not. As an industry, I don't think you can point to many where CEOs from around the world came together and picked out 4 biggest issues and made concrete strides to what they could do to actually improve the industry together. And I think that's breaking traditional ground. We came together as a team, and we thought there's another big initiative out there, and it's there for all of us. It will help us break these traditional ways that we do business, and it will help attract new colleagues to this industry, but also it'll be good for everybody. And this is digitalization of global trade or global supply chains. And in our group, we focused on the end-to-end physical movement of goods and the fact that we have a lot of antiquated processes. It's still paper-based. We did comparisons. If you book an airline ticket, you're probably not printing out your air ticket anymore, but in this trade, you have a lot of documents, a lot of paper, a lot of manual processes. So working together collaboratively across this industry, we can help digitalize global trade, and we can get some key benefits. First and foremost, you can get efficiencies. Not efficiencies for some, efficiencies for everybody involved in end-to-end transport. By making it digital, by putting in data once and not having to print it and being able to share data with all permission participants that are involved in the end-to-end supply chain. Secondly, it's not just about sharing the pie differently. We have an opportunity to create new value, to expand the capabilities and to expand global trade. If we can make global trade easier, more straightforward, more entities can get involved in global trade. We thought that there was a clear path to do this, to put together a working group of people from within this room and maybe some others that could help us. And it's a cross-section of industry participants, including port authorities, maybe some of the digital platforms that are already starting to work in this field, but also customers. We have to focus on cargo interests. If we can be self-critical for the past, we're asset-intensive industry, we tend to focus on ourselves and the components, but we have to focus on the customer and those who we serve. Without them, we're out of business. Bringing those in, bringing some other entities in, financial institutions. If we're going to change the way that we do documentary letters of credit, if we can use true e-bills of lading, we need to bring in those that are part of that process. There are 2 key elements that we need to focus on. First is standards. If you're going to be trading digitally, if you're going to change the way you work, you need to have a common language, a way to communicate more effectively. Even today, simple things, port codes. The Port of Hong Kong has 22 different codes that people associate the Port of Hong Kong with, 20 different codes. And then if you're looking for different terminals within Hong Kong, you have a different problem. But there's an opportunity for us to work with standards organizations that are already approaching this, to invite them in, to embrace standards where they exist, and to work collaboratively with others as needed. We thought UN CFACT was an entity we should work with. DCSA, we're open to consideration of others. Also learning, not be too proud to learn from others. So IATA, who's faced some of the same problems we have, but have gone a little bit further, a little bit faster. How can we learn from what others have done before? Again, getting in terminals, ocean carriers are critical to this, and also shippers. So we have some shippers in our midst. We have GE in cargo, Mercura. We can have other entities come in and be part of this solution. There's 2 key elements we have to work on. One of them I mentioned was data standards. The other one is data governance. It's very important that we have a clear understanding of provenance of data, data governance, compliance, getting in global authorities and how they need to treat data, how they need to see the data, and how do we work collaboratively. We think there's a huge opportunity for the industry to go a long way forward, and we have the leadership in this room that can come together and work to make this a reality.
Michael, thank you so much. Just a couple of key questions on this, because I think this is a big one. And there's a lot there, and I can see that you've identified sort of we need common standards that we operate under, but also common standards around and governance around data, and we'll get into data here in the next two working groups as well, and I'm sure there's some overlap there. But if you're going to break it down in terms of the next year, concretely what this working group needs to do, who would you focus on engaging? You mentioned DCSA, IATA, UNC, UNFACT. Where would you focus those energies over the next 12 months?
So from this group, we would look at industry leaders, people that have shown an interest in this. So we talked about PSA from Trade Lens. We'd be happy to support this, but also ocean carriers. We need to have constituents from the major sectors come in and formalize what is the goal for the next 12 months. We talked about not trying to boil the ocean. You can get very involved in what you can do with digitization.
Yeah.
But there's a clear opportunity for us to say, what can we do around standards? What can we do about making sure that there's clear governance over data, which is a critical issue. Until people are comfortable with how their data will be shared or not shared, and how sensitive data can be protected, perhaps through blockchain or other solutions, then you can find real ways to move forward faster. So
That's exactly right, and we're going to get to data in just a second, and I love the term, we can't boil the ocean, that's right. How do we demonstrate that we can do this? At a small, like a pilot project perhaps, or?
Yeah, we tried to not to get too prescriptive from the group, but I think the group could come together very quickly and in a short period of time lay out the objectives for the first 12 months and then say, can we get collaboration on here? But it takes participation from leaders in this room and their teams back home. And then I think we can start a path where we can make real progress instead of talking about digitization, make real progress within these next 12 months.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Michael. And to build on that conversation, because data is very, very critical and central to unlocking the supply chain potential, right? I would love to next hear from Rajesh on pooling data for common benefit.
Thank you. I was warned by the team to thank their contributions but not disclose their names, because if I mess up, then I take one for the team. So, so we broke that whole phrase into two, pooling data and what's the common benefit. So when we talked about pooling data, the challenges that came up were who owns the data, I mean data ownership, and then what's the motivation. We felt strongly that if you ask someone to share data, then there must be something that they get out of that sharing experience. So what's the motivation for somebody to share the data? And the third, that what is the protocol? We need a lot of data cleansing, otherwise, people will spend a ton of time cleaning the data. And then if you start that with motivation, we felt that we should ask people to share or request people to share data that does not have business consequence. So if you ask people to share incidents, then there's always some kind of a hesitation. So can we go few levels down and look at near misses, look at reporting of unsafe acts as a start? And then we felt that various organizations are at different levels. Some are on mobile already, some are on paper, some on Excel sheets, but all this can be imported and exported into a data lake. And I also know, with my limited experience with the P&I clubs, that we're already working on some form of, building insights out of these root cause analysis. Because what we have today in loss prevention is kind of lessons learned from losses. So how can we redesign this loss prevention itself? So what we wanted to build upon is to share those data in a form and then structure it and build some insights and give back to the members through the IG group. So we will build models around these. I think a lot of it is already there, but then what are the variables that need to go in and how do we structure those models is the first step. And silently I've been kind of lobbying with Rolf and Ed and Hugo to try and come together and at least agree to share these data, which I think they've already agreed. Yeah? So we'll get there. But in some form, I think we will get this to be shared because it's data that's available with most companies, and they actually take this and feed back to their fleets once in every 3 months. So we want to see how can we make that live. So that's on safety. The second was, can we build a similar model on asset risks? So from Patricia and from the insurance perspective, can we model asset risks and then give a feedback to the members through the IG group club itself, so that we create a small data pool there, and then we feed in the data and the benefit of that data goes back to the members.
Can you talk just for a few minutes about, because data is huge right now, and the politics of data is huge. What makes the IG group different in being a trusted partner that our companies would feel safe giving their data to as a clearinghouse, whether it's for safety, whether it's for insurance, whether it's for supply chain?
So I think the fundamental concept of IG group is mutuality. So we are there as a member for the mutual benefit of each one of us. So I think in any case, they have some data already available on incidents and some of the major incidents across the port, and they also have a rich library actually about what has happened in various ports, various types of ships. So there is data that is already available there, and we have also seen some anonymized data with Rolf already that can be useful. So I think the concept of mutuality is already there, and people I feel will be far more willing to share that kind of data into the pool.
And then the data cleansing protocol, how difficult will it be to agree to a singular protocol there?
I think for near misses, if you look at fundamentals, say for a near miss, it's not such a complicated structure when we ask for reporting of near misses. It's somebody can even take a picture and then send it out, right? It's reporting an unsafe act or an unsafe condition. But we definitely need to build some structure, so that's the first step. So I think when I go back, we'll sit amongst the IG group and try and build that simple structure. It can't be too complicated. It can't have 15 fields. I think it should have minimum 3 or 4 or 5 fields to start with, and find out what are those 5 fields that can bring in some radical insights out of this. So our focus is to stay to 5.
That's right. And you correctly identified the motivation for contribution is going to be a critical one here.
Yes.
Getting people to give the data and then scaling that so that it's something that everyone feels comfortable doing.
Yeah, and it will give us some leading indicators on process and all that stuff, right, for organizations. So you not only learn from your own near misses, but you also have the collective benefit of learning from everyone else's. So that was one. And the last one was Singapore port already has this port interface that they were trying to build. So how can we then club in the port data also into the vessels and connect them? So one trial that we want to do, Bengti has promised that she'll go back and come and tell us what are the benefits for somebody who's going to contribute into that port interface. Clearly, we see that they will then distribute that information into the marine service providers. So typically, a master will not have to then go and make multiple connects for different services that's being taken in from a port. So that's the other piece that we're trying to build. And then how do we build that interface that can connect between the ship and the shore? And obviously, cybersecurity is one big thing. So Bengti has promised that she'll go back to the team and figure out how we will provide a cyber-secure kind of system. Because otherwise, there is no real motivation for, again, to share the data if there is no cybersecurity.
Do you have any idea right now how many databases there are that's connecting to the global maritime shipping industry?
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you so much for your team's work on that one. Thank you. All right, Ronald, bring us home with the standards for data and exchange.
Well, thank you. I'm the designated volunteer for my group. And I walk a little bit to the board, trying to summarize our discussion over here. Because it starts with standards for data and exchange. And pretty soon we came to the conclusion that the topic was simply too big to handle. We debated a little bit what happens in other industries, and of course IATA came along for the airliners and the likes of. Discussing in a global open platform. Actually, it's a topic that kind of overlaps with most of the other boards over here. So looking at standardization, rules, voluntarity, interoperability, priorities, we came to the conclusion that probably it makes more sense to just take one use topic. And we took emissions as a use case. And the idea is like IATA, is to found an association that is built on trust. Because it's all about sharing data, and sharing data comes with trust. And sharing data also comes with a value that comes in return. So the idea is to create an association, and that association's first task is to design a common language about emission. Common language is just another word for standards. Common language in such a way that data can be shared between the stakeholders in such a way that it's not kind of used for competitive reasons, but it is for the bigger good. So if you look at the stakeholders that we found around an association like this, there's on one hand you have ports, you have canals, you have authorities and local governments. On the other hand, you have owners and charterers. So the trust is, if you look at that little picture that we made on that middle board, I will walk to it. The trust is that on one side you have ports and canals. On the other side, you have charterers and owners, the commercial entities. So the sharing of data goes over in this way. The sharing of data does not go in between the commercial entities. So that is where the trust comes from. That trust you can govern by terms of reference or a charter behind the association. So if you look at why people would be sharing data in this way, and you look at the stakeholders, the ports, the governments, the owners and the charters, it is about the environment, it is about commercial values, it is about efficiency values, and it is about public perception. So imagine that a port or a canal is prioritizing based on how green your vessel is, or give you better charges if your vessel is greener. The value for ports or authorities could be that finally they can show what they are doing to meet their country's targets on greenhouse and emission standards. So the actions that we landed upon is, first of all, set up an association. But there we left the discussion associated with the GMF on itself. Then build common language on emissions, reach out to the charterers as one of the major and at Forland stakeholders, and come to rules of engagement and a charter around this, so that you know that the organization and the way data is used is based on trust. That's where we ended.
Thank you so much. Quick question for you. Is there an existing association that can be repurposed?
Well, I think there are many there are many places, commercial or non-profit, where little pieces of the puzzle are existing. In the same way where you say how many databases are there in the world, I don't know. But I think we will find out pretty soon if we start reaching out to the charters. And I think some of them did already a lot of this work, and then take it from there.
The critical point that you made that stuck with me is that the sharing, you found an association, fine, but built on trust.
Mm-hmm.
How do we know that there's trust there? The sharing of data does not go between commercial entities.
Right.
Right? And do we already have something like that? I don't know.
Well, technically, it's not very difficult to do that. That's what you see within organizations as well, where people get information on a need-to-know basis. So the technical execution of that is not the most difficult part.
Excellent. Yes?
Yeah, within TradeLens, we have the same challenge. So we have separate nodes where certain carriers' data is on their node only and other carriers on their own. So there's no sharing of information. It comes through the platform, then into the respective nodes within that carrier base.
Huh.
So, it is partitioned, and it's a very critical issue for, preserving that confidentiality of commercial data.
And are there similar takeaways from the way that the airlines industry has been doing this work as well, that we might?
Yeah, we're eager to learn from IATA and whoever else has gone before us.
That's right. That's right. Great. Thank you very much, all 6 of you, for your contributions, for your working group contributions. This has been a great first round. Please join me in thanking Caroline, Graham, Gary, Michael, Rajesh, and Ronald for our first round of the fishbowl. Thank you. Thank you.